A friend suddenly asked what happens to people after they die while they were drinking together. Ghislain casually replied that he did not know since he had not died yet. The friend mentioned tales of reincarnation, and Ghislain expressed a wish to be born into an ordinary family next time, wanting to live quietly. The friend laughed and questioned if he truly meant that, to which Ghislain affirmed the friend pointed out that many were suffering from disasters and that taking action would cause more deaths. Ghislain said he did not care. The friend remarked on the pain beneath Ghislain's cheerful demeanor, and Ghislain responded that everyone has a painful past. Nodding, the friend raised his glass and suggested they go monster hunting again after this, telling Ghislain to find someone fun to fight. The friend chuckled, drank, and set his glass down, offering to pray for Ghislain's success. Ghislain declined, saying he did not believe in gods but only in his sword. The friend shook his head and stood up, telling Ghislain to take care and that he would not go far. Ghislain agreed. A black vortex appeared, sucking the friend's body into it until he vanished. Ghislain muttered that it was a convenient skill, then lifted his glass alone and drank 3 times as memories began to resurface. Ghislain was born as the heir of Perdium territory in the northern part of the Lutania kingdom, a poor and barren land constantly fighting barbarians. He had lived a life full of complaints, comparing himself to other noble youths, which bred inferiority that expressed itself through childish behavior, leading to constant ridicule. He bore every bad nickname thrown at him: good for nothing, madman, shut in, swordmaster, and eventually fled his family. For several years, he wandered as a mercenary, surviving countless battlefields by luck and honing his skills and reputation while dancing between life and death. He began to miss his hometown and thought returning to his family would make everything right. Filled with regret and apologies for his youthful recklessness, he planned to return and be a great support. He resolved that he should have become stronger. A new goal arose, and Ghislain endured bone-crushing pain, spending years of hardship fighting countless disasters that struck the continent. His family, friends, and the people of his territory would never return. The war was still not over, and disasters swept across the continent, staining everything with blood. Pained groans of people never ceased, but his heart could no longer contain those screams. It was time to set aside regret. There was still one thing left to do. He had always postponed this task with reasons like still being weak, lacking, or cautious. Now, it was time for revenge on those who had destroyed his family. A sense of emptiness was consuming him, and he could no longer delay. Their blood would fill the void within him. Although ranked lower among the 7, his tactical value was said to equal that of an entire nation's military. Amidst ongoing wars, Ghislain's actions drew public outrage, with many questioning why he would incite conflict now. He smashed everything in his path, laying waste to the kingdom. However, his advance soon met fierce resistance. Opponents he had never known appeared and blocked his way, yet they were not from Lutania. Ghislain wondered why these outsiders opposed him but pushed aside his doubts, calmly dealing with them one by one as he progressed to win the war. Ghislain needed to finish it quickly, but the emergence of hidden powerhouses derailed his plans. As the war dragged on, finances deteriorated rapidly, and mercenaries began to leave, weighing gains and losses. This was how it ended, though Aiden's armor was dented and his hair disheveled. He bore no life, threatening injuries. Body despite bleeding, Ghislain grinned through clenched teeth at Aiden and called him an annoying bastard, saying he did not expect him to interfere. Aiden laughed as he surveyed the battlefield, noting the destruction in every direction, bodies piled like mountains and blood flowing like rivers. He told Ghislain that his men had all fled and called him a lowly scoundrel without pride. Ghislain replied that a mercenary who knows how to survive is skilled and that there is no need to die if one can live. Aiden snorted and raised his sword to Ghislain's neck, asking if he had any last words. Ghislain said none, only regretting that he could not completely destroy the kingdom, and invited Aiden to kill him. Aiden found Ghislain presumptuous and said he had never liked him, feeling disgusted to be mentioned in the same breath as a vulgar mercenary. Ghislain retorted by asking if anyone liked Aiden. Aiden then expressed surprise that Ghislain was the last survivor of the Perdium family. Ghislain's eyebrows twitched at Aiden's strange tone, which felt more than a casual observation. Seeing Ghislain's confused look, Aiden smiled with satisfaction, leaned closer, and whispered that he never thought the lost. Ghislain asked how Aiden knew that Aiden was not a citizen of Lutania, so there was no reason for him to know such detailed information about events long ago in a foreign land. Moreover, the fact that he had searched for Ghislain was perplexing. Aiden revealed that he and others had conspired with Duke Delphine to destroy Ghislain's family. Ghislain was stunned by this revelation, knowing that Duke Delphine had already launched a rebellion and seized the kingdom, making him the target of Ghislain's revenge. The involvement of foreign conspirators was hard to believe. Ghislain demanded clarification about the backing from the Duke's house, to which Aiden replied that they were all on the same side. Despite Despite Aiden's arrogant and repulsive demeanor, he was known as the noble knight who preached justice, making his involvement in the conspiracy against Perdium difficult to accept. Ghislain questioned why Aiden would involve himself with a foreign family, but Aiden dismissed the notion of simple territorial boundaries, implying Ghislain, as a lowly mercenary, would not understand such complexities. When Ghislain asked if Aiden was also involved in the war, Aiden confirmed to neatly tie up loose ends and protect his own name. Aiden then raised his sword to strike Ghislain, who struggled to rise but could not summon mana due to his broken body. Aiden mocked him for failing to live within his means as a mercenary and swung his sword swiftly. Ghislain felt a chilling sensation as time seemed to stop, his vision spinning as blood bloomed around him. Memories of regret, emptiness, sorrow, and disappointment flooded back, but what remained strongest was his unquenchable rage. He recalled a friend's words about reincarnation and vowed to tear his enemies to shreds if reborn. His severed head fell to the ground, eyes wide in anguish as the mercenary king Ghislain took his last breath. Ghislain awoke cautiously in a military field tent. Disoriented and unsure if he was alive or dreaming, he realized he was alone and unbound, finding a sword leaning against the makeshift bed. He felt no mana. He knew his swordsmanship remained formidable. He resolved that once he escaped, he could recover his mana and make his enemies regret their actions. Suddenly, a soldier entered the tent carrying food. Ghislain quickly drew his sword and threatened the soldier to answer questions honestly, warning he might not spare his life. The soldier was startled but relaxed, sighing and addressing Ghislain as young lord, questioning why he was acting this way and suggesting he return to the castle. Ghislain was shocked by the familiar irritation in the soldier's tone and the unexpected title. Ghislain asked if the soldier mistook him for someone else and whether the mercenary king was imprisoned there. Soldier scoffed, denying the existence of such a king and mocking Ghislain's behavior. Ghislain admitted he disliked being there, but the soldier insisted Ghislain could leave any time since he had followed them. Willingly, Ghislain asked where he was, and the soldier explained they had come to exterminate orcs near the estate. Ghislain inquired how his mana had been suppressed, but the soldier laughed, feigning ignorance of mana. Ghislain felt a strange familiarity in the dismissal. Looking around, he noticed a flag with a black background and a white wolf emblem, the crest of the destroyed Perdium family, hanging inside the tent. When Ghislain questioned its presence, the soldier ignored him and pushed his arm aside, knocking away his sword. Ghislain then noticed his hand, now white and smooth without scars. Unlike before, he rushed to a water jug to see his reflection and gasped at the sight of lustrous golden hair, fair skin, and a finely featured face. Unlike the scarred, bleary-eyed mercenary king, he remembered the soldier clicked his tongue, calling Ghislain crazy and saying he had lost it completely. Shocked, Ghislain examined his reflection again and realized he looked no older than his late teens, pinching his arm to confirm reality. He concluded this was not a dream. The vivid memories of his life as the mercenary king were too brutal to be imagined. He understood he had returned to the past, retaining memories of the future. Dazed, Ghislain looked at the soldier whose attire and insignia identified him as belonging to the Perdium estate. Pointing at the soldier with trembling fingers, Ghislain whispered in amazement. The soldier sighed and gazed at the ceiling with exasperation. The soldier advised Ghislain to eat and return to the castle. Noting that he did not look well as the soldier turned to leave, Ghislain anxiously called out to him, asking for his name. The soldier replied that his name was Ricardo. Ghislain complimented Ricardo, who responded in kind, calling Ghislain handsome. Ghislain chuckled, embarrassed, and mentioned he hadn't been called handsome since he got his facial scars. Ricardo fell silent, pondering how a man claiming to have calluses from training could have no scars. When Ricardo remained silent, Ghislain awkwardly sat down and tried to explain his situation. After gathering his thoughts, he looked seriously at Ricardo and confessed that he had died and come back to life, believing he had returned to the past. Ricardo responded with silence, then showed a look of pity, asking if Ghislain planned to go to a monastery or tower, places where nobles were confined if they were thought mad. Ghislain, aware of his damaged reputation, laughed nervously and denied it as a joke. Ricardo then took his leave, and Ghislain lowered his head, muttering that he was going crazy. He knew no one would believe him, not even himself. Noticing that a Perdium soldier was nearby, Ghislain realized he was still before he had left home in his previous life, when he had run away. He resolved to revive his memories and avoid being locked up by poking around too much. Organizing his thoughts, he cautiously stepped out of the tent and took in the worn tents and soldiers standing guard. Poor state of the Perdium estate confirmed to him that he had truly returned to the past. Soldiers saluted him with subtle disdain, reinforcing his sense of displacement. Ghislain laughed at the unbelievable situation, throwing his arms open and looking at the sky like a madman. Nearby soldiers shook their heads in pity, but he ignored them. He believed he could set everything right. The past regret regrets, mistakes, and future despair were yet to happen. The loved ones he had lost were still alive. A glimmer of determination ignited in Gislin's eyes as he thought about Duke Delphine, who had destroyed his territory, and those behind him. He vowed to kill them all. Armed with knowledge of the future, he could grow stronger faster and prepare for every danger. He told himself to remain calm and take them out one by one. Gislin took a deep breath to calm his body and mind, deciding first to assess the current situation. He recalled a vivid memory of an orc subjugation mission where he had nearly died. The subjugation team, consisting of one knight and about 30 soldiers, had been sent to deal with 3 orcs near the territory. Everyone had thought that force sufficient, but in reality, over 20 orcs had been present. The team was overwhelmed, and Gislin had insisted on leading the charge, which led to near disaster. Looking around the camp and the tent layout, Gislin was certain the ambush was imminent. It was past noon, and the sun was beginning to dip. He needed to prepare immediately because the orcs would attack before sunset. Since the orcs had not attacked systematically before, there was a chance of victory if they prepared. Gislin muttered in frustration that he wished he had returned to the past earlier. Suddenly thrust into this situation, he felt dazed and unprepared, but he could not avoid the fight. Many lives had been lost because of him in both his past and current lives, and now he had the chance to correct that mistake. He resolved to think positively, believing the future of the territory would change from this day forward. His expression showed firm will as he prepared to inform the subjugation team commander that there were not 3 orcs but 20. However, he hesitated, realizing that as the northern scoundrel and a piece of trash, he would be ridiculed and dismissed if he spoke up. Gislin doubted persuasion would work without trust or basis. After thinking, he concluded he had no choice but to command himself. Though uneasy, he saw no other option. He tried to recall how he had managed to take command in his previous life, remembering vague past events where he had insisted on leading despite opposition and threats. Gislin recalled how, in the past, he had thrown a childish fit, demanding command with a tantrum. He chuckled at his former immaturity, realizing how pathetic it was to struggle against being looked down on despite lacking ability. Determined not to repeat that behavior, he resolved to approach the situation with dignity and maturity. He walked toward the knight leading the subjugation team. The knight, Skovin, immediately showed displeasure upon seeing Gislin and bluntly asked what he wanted. Gislin cleared his throat, maintained a gentle tone, and asked for Skovin's name, which the knight provided with an inward scowl at the young lord's ignorance. Gislin then stated that he had come to speak urgently, prompting Skovin's curt inquiry about the matter. Gislin politely but firmly demanded that Skovin hand over command. Skovin was taken aback, viewing Gislin as a useless nuisance suddenly making unreasonable demands. Although tempted to strike him, Skovin restrained himself, reminding himself that Gislin was the heir to the territory. He told Gislin that command was impossible to relinquish since he was the appointed leader of the team, dismissing Gislin's claim that he should lead the soldiers. Instead, Gislin stood tall with a confident, almost arrogant posture, his eyes void of emotion, resembling a true swordmaster. Skovin reiterated that command was his and urged Gislin to rest, promising a swift end to the subjugation and return to the castle. Gislin repeated his intention to take command. Skovin felt frustrated as Gislin's persistence felt like speaking to a wall. He explained that he had received authority directly from their lord and could not hand it over arbitrarily, even to the young lord. Gislin countered that his orders on the scene took precedence, and that trusting the frontline commander's judgment was natural in battle. Skovin inwardly seethed, thinking Gislin ignorant of battlefield realities, but he recognized the futility of arguing further. He resolved to allow Gislin to act as commander in name only while he himself would handle the orcs. Skovin asked if Gislin truly insisted on this course. Gislin accepted eagerly and immediately began preparations for battle. Skovin questioned the premature preparations since the orcs had not yet been spotted, but Gislin dismissed the need for explanation, insisting on trusting the frontline commander's judgment. Gislin summoned the 30 soldiers, who gathered quickly but regarded him with weary, resentful eyes. They were tired of cleaning up after the troublesome young Lord. Gislin smiled inwardly at their fickleness, recalling how he had once despised their disdain and deepened his own inferiority complex in response. Soldiers resigned themselves to his eccentricity and fell into formation, muttering complaints under their breath. Suddenly, a thudding sound approached rapidly. The soldiers turned and shouted in surprise as dozens of orcs charged toward them. Skovin panicked and drew his sword, calling for calm and battle readiness. He was stunned to see the soldiers already raising shields and readying spears, having been prepared by Gislin's early orders. Skovin stared at Gislin in disbelief, who was busy assessing the soldiers' condition rather than boasting. Despite the formation, the overwhelming number of orcs caused the soldiers to tremble in fear. Gislin patted one of the anxious soldiers on the shoulder and asked asked why he was so scared, questioning if he feared the orcs. The soldier admitted he was frightened. Ghislain explained that momentum was the most important factor in a fight, just like the orcs charging toward them. Seeing their fear, Ghislain urged them not to be scared, warning that fear would prevent them from showing their true skills and lead to death, which would be unjust. He smiled gently, recalling his experiences teaching rookie mercenaries. The soldier considered Ghislain's words but doubted their credibility, thinking it ridiculous to hear such advice from the young lord rumored to be weaker than a mere soldier. Ghislain noticed the soldier's skepticism and accused him of cursing him silently. The soldier denied it, but Ghislain clicked his tongue and turned away, lamenting how he was used to being disrespected. Despite being the king of mercenaries and one of the continent's 7 strongest warriors, he resolved to change his reputation over time. Ghislain grinned and stepped forward, twirling his sword casually as he approached the orc. Scoven shouted at him to get back, but Ghislain dismissed the warning and said he would handle it himself. Scoven planned to retreat the soldiers first and then retrieve Ghislain, but froze when he saw what happened next. The lead orc swung a rusted axe toward Ghislain with a powerful strike meant to split a human in half. Ghislain stepped aside with a smile, letting the axe crash into the ground. As the orc raised its axe again, Ghislain's sword sliced across its throat in a flash, and the orc fell with a guttural sound. Soldiers gaped, jaws dropping at the sight of the orc writhing on the ground. Orcs were known for thick skin, and without mana, it was difficult to inflict serious wounds, yet Ghislain had severed the orc's neck. Effortlessly, Scoven stood frozen, mouth agape, shocked that Ghislain had incapacitated the orc in a single blow without using mana. Since mana was a supernatural power that helped humans transcend their limits, killing an orc without it required immense strength or extreme skill. Ghislain had never trained physically and was weak, so the only explanation was that he possessed unimaginable swordsmanship that struck the weakest point at the perfect moment. The charging orcs halted, startled by their leader's fall, and began to encircle Ghislain. Ghislain grinned, noting that all of them aimed for him first, which made things easier. He had summoned the soldiers in advance and set up a formation to minimize casualties. Although he could kill all the orcs, preventing injury to the soldiers with his current skills was difficult. He felt grateful that the orcs charged him foolishly. Ghislain lifted his sword with an arrogant smile, recalling that although he knew his family's mana cultivation technique, he had never truly trained it. He had begun fighting for survival as a mercenary without mana. Now, it was both similar and different, as he had accumulated extreme swordsmanship over the years. The orcs swung their axes wildly but missed every time as Ghislain evaded with minimal movement, using their charging force to slice their weakest necks. With each swing of his sword, one orc fell, spewing blood. Ghislain grumbled about his weak body, drenched in sweat and aching, but he smiled, enjoying the fight as proof of being alive. Govan watched in awe, swallowing hard. Even he, who could use mana, couldn't move like that. He wondered why the young lord moved so flawlessly despite struggling, and recognized swordsmanship he had never seen before. It was as if Ghislain were a swordmaster who couldn't use mana, possibly even greater. The 7 strongest on the continent were superhumans transcending human limits, and Ghislain's accumulated experience and skills allowed him to surpass those limits despite his frail body. As Ghislain swung his sword again, another orc fell, blood spilling forth. The orcs began to retreat hesitantly. More than 20 orcs had been reduced to just 5, most decapitated or stabbed to death by Ghislain in moments. Ghislain taunted the orcs, pointing his sword at them and mocking their weakness despite their warrior race reputation, though inwardly he feared dying again and longed to lie down, realizing how weak he had been. After suddenly using muscles and tendons that hadn't moved in a while, Ghislain's entire body creaked in protest. He discreetly counted the remaining orcs and noted that 5 still remained, more than he had expected given his weakening body. The toll of wielding strength beyond limits was evident as his feeble body refused to cooperate. The orcs began to slowly retreat, seemingly affected by Ghislain's bravado. The orcs were renowned as a warrior race. The wandering orcs valued their lives more than battle. When they realized they could not handle the human before them, the orcs lost all fighting spirit. Ghislain's heart raced, and he prepared to attack, but his legs suddenly gave way, causing him to stumble and collapse onto the ground. Seeing Ghislain's panicked expression, the orcs brightened with renewed hope. One particularly quick-witted orc raised its axe and charged at Ghislain. Scoven, witnessing this, gasped and rushed forward, shouting for the young lord. The orc swung its axe down toward Ghislain, but Ghislain rolled to the side, causing the axe to crash into the earth. Seizing the moment, Ghislain sprang up and swung his sword at the orc's neck, slashing it cleanly. Blood sprayed as the orc fell, and Scoven halted in his tracks. Ghislain brushed his hair back with a relaxed smile, declaring the mission accomplished. The remaining orcs began to retreat again, convinced Ghislain had feigned weakness to lure them in. Scoven looked at Ghislain with confusion, noting that his legs were shaking and even the hand holding the sword trembled slightly, a sign that his muscles were not functioning properly. Yet Ghislain's expression remained calm, as if on a leisurely walk. If it were an act, Scoven thought, Ghislain would have the talent to become an award-winning actor. As the orcs and Scoven watched suspiciously, Ghislain decided that he could not afford to show weakness. Earlier he had told the soldiers to watch, but now it was time to get them moving. He put on a stern expression and ordered the soldiers to attack the remaining orcs. The soldiers blinked but showed no sign of moving. Ghislain stared wide-eyed. Realizing none of them were obeying, he understood how little respect he had earned over time. No matter how much of a scoundrel he had been, he had never expected such contempt from the soldiers. Frustrated, Ghislain called out to Ricardo, ordering him to block the front. Ricardo shouted in alarm, refusing to comply. Ghislain's frustration grew as he realized no one would listen. He turned to the real commander, Scoven, and shouted at him to act, warning that the orcs were fleeing and that standing still would mean death. Snapping to attention, Scoven commanded the soldiers to attack, and they moved like clockwork. Scoven positioned himself in front of the retreating orcs, using his mana to move faster than anyone else present. As he slowed the orcs' retreat, the soldiers began to surround them. Ghislain wanted to move to finish off the remaining orcs, but his body refused to cooperate. Feeling as if his bones were twisting, he gave up and sat down elegantly on the ground. Ghislain knew fighting depended on momentum and confidence. He could not show weakness. This was the foundation of a mercenary's bravado and swagger. Fortunately, Scoven's skill as a knight ensured no trouble in dealing with the remaining orcs. Before long, all orcs had fallen. Ghislain, pretending to be relaxed, laughed and asked if anyone had been hurt or killed, claiming the situation had been manageable. The soldiers silently nodded, feeling unable to speak. To them, Ghislain was a pathetic waste, weak and untrained, but he had just displayed tremendous swordsmanship, effortlessly slaying nearly 20 orcs alone. Had this talent been known, they would not have treated him with such disdain. Scoven, eyes trembling, asked if Ghislain was all right. His feelings mirrored those of the soldiers. Even the commander of the Perdium Knights could not showcase such swordsmanship. He wanted to demand an explanation, but Ghislain spoke first, assuring him he was fine and asking if they were heading back to the castle. Scoven confirmed they would return now that the orcs had been dealt with. Ghislain urged immediate departure. Scoven was taken aback by Ghislain's urgent tone but did not ask why. At that moment, Ghislain lost consciousness and collapsed. Even a mercenary's bravado had limits. When Ghislain opened his eyes, he sighed in relief at the sight of a clean ceiling, realizing he was alive. He had pushed his body to the limit without mana, causing him to lose consciousness and leaving him aching all over, a solid proof that the situation was real. The room was not large but neat and elegantly decorated, resembling a noble's quarters. The familiar environment made Ghislain tilt his head in confusion as memories threatened to resurface. He wondered if he had returned to the castle and if this was his room, noting that some time had passed since he lost consciousness. Ghislain recognized her as Belinda, his personal head maid and tutor, who had always defended him when others criticized him. He sprang from the bed and hugged her tightly. Belinda, concerned, asked if he had done something wrong again, but Ghislain smiled widely and said he was simply happy to see her. Belinda looked at him suspiciously, asking why he would be so happy to see someone he saw every day. Ghislain earnestly explained that he had died and come back to life. Belinda interrupted, sarcastically noting that he had died to an orc and just resurrected in bed. Seeing Ghislain about to say more nonsense, she stepped closer and whispered in his ear that he was in a dangerous situation and if the maids heard, he would be locked up for real. Ghislain fell silent. Ghislain nodded in resignation at Belinda's warning, acknowledging the difficulty of conveying sincerity with his tarnished reputation. When he asked where they were, Belinda replied that it was his room and expressed relief that he was awake. Ghislain looked around, recognizing the familiar surroundings from his youth. Belinda noted that he seemed fine but had sweated a lot and should take a bath. She shook a golden bell on the table, prompting several maids to enter and prepare the bath for the young master. Maids quickly approached Ghislain, who was flustered as they led him away after bathing. Ghislain stood before a mirror, seeing a clear reflection of his youthful noble self, free of scars and harsh expressions. Belinda teased him about liking his own face, to which he confidently agreed. She wore a slightly disapproving expression but left the room after advising him to rest longer. Ghislain remained absorbed in the mirror's reflection until the door creaked open and a girl peeked inside. He recognized the girl as his younger sister Elena, a golden-haired girl around 16 or 17 years old. Seeing her made his heart drop, stirring memories he had not processed since returning to the past and fighting battles. He recalled the criticism he faced after the subjugation team was wiped out and how the vassals demanded his imprisonment. resentment, leading him to resolve to leave his family. The accident that befell Elena during that tumultuous time had been the decisive factor in his departure. Ghislain called out to Elena with a fierce expression, startling her. He asked how many days remained until the festival, and she replied about a week. Ghislain covered his face, smiling and laughing quietly, recalling that Elena would die a week later. His eyes held intense killing intent beneath his hands as he remembered the day he wished most to turn back. When he suddenly grabbed Elena's face, his shoulders shaking, she looked frightened, knowing his unpredictable temper. She denied anything was wrong and remarked that it had been a long time. Ghislain expressed his overwhelming joy at seeing her alive again, spreading his arms wide. Elena, flustered, reminded him they had seen each other just days ago and warned him not to come closer. Ghislain hugged her tightly with closed eyes, nearly moved to tears. Elena, genuinely flustered, twisted to push him away and accused him of causing trouble. As she prepared to speak sharply, she paused at the sight of his soft eyes, smile, and longing expression, one she had never seen. For confused by her feelings, she eyed him suspiciously but noted his genuine happiness, almost like the brother she once knew. Their father had been away on expeditions, and after their mother's death in their youth, they had depended on each other. Over time, Ghislain had become a troublemaker, and their relationship had grown distant. Elena squinted at him, and Ghislain cleared his throat, saying he was simply happy to see her and asking why she was in his room. Elena looked at him incredulously, recalling how he had spoken coldly to her just days before, telling her to get lost and that her presence was disgusting. He had come only because she heard he had nearly been killed by an orc, and Belinda had suggested she check on him. Belinda had hoped their sibling bond would improve if Elena visited. Ghislain boasted that he had handled the orcs himself and that it was no big deal, claiming he was very strong. Elena stifled a laugh at his boastful shrug. Ghislain began gesturing wildly, recounting how he had taken down the orcs, which made Elena laugh. His bluffing revealed a lighter side to him she hadn't seen in a while. He mentioned calling for Ricardo, whom Elena immediately recognized as the flirtatious soldier. Ghislain noted Ricardo's handsomeness, and Elena said he was famous and popular with women. Ghislain compared him to Aiden, calling both scoundrels. Elena asked who Aiden was, dismissing the name as someone troublesome. A flicker of menace appeared in Ghislain's eyes as Elena regarded him with a knowing expression. She thought he was improving but recognized he wasn't fully himself yet. Still, it was progress, and she resolved to watch him closely to see how long it lasted. Ghislain told her he was heading out and urged her to take care of herself. He promised that next time he would recount the time he had slain a dragon. Elena teased him, asking if he had slain it in his dreams and whether he even knew what a dragon was. After hearing Ghislain's exaggerated story, Elena left in high spirits, finding his boasting preferable to his previous foul mood that had made conversations unbearable. After Elena departed, Ghislain continued staring at the door with a slight smile. He admitted to himself that he had never forgotten her. Not even for a moment the image of Elena's mutilated, brutally slain body remained etched in his memory. He also could not forget the faces of his father and vassals, found beheaded and hung at the castle gates upon his return to the estate. He called himself a coward and a disgrace for being too terrified to act and only running away. His smile darkened as he resolved that now, given the chance to set things right, he would prevent the fall of Perdium. Ghislain grabbed a pen and paper and hurriedly wrote down every piece of future information he could recall, roughly remembering the major events across the continent and their general timing, which would be invaluable. In planning his next moves, saving Elena was his top priority. The festival, marking prosperity and the start of the harvest season, would begin in a week. Even in the harsh northern territory, where battles with barbarians were unending, people held festivals to pray for prosperity. He recalled that, at the time of the festival, he had been so criticized and ignored that he had decided to leave the family. At Elena's suggestion, he had gone out to see the festival with her, but his ruined mood had prevented him from enjoying it, and he had returned to the castle alone. Since the festival took place within the estate and Elena had knights escorting her, he had not thought much of it. Shortly after, Elena and her knights were found dead. That tragedy broke Ghislain, and he left the castle to escape the whispers. That had been the last time he set foot in Perdium. He regretted not being with her, though he doubted he could have done anything back then, given his weakness. Leaving Elena behind and returning alone had haunted him ever since. Ghislain wondered if her death had been orchestrated by the Delphine Duchy. In his past life, Elena's murderer had been revealed as a noble from another estate who had come to see the festival. The accused party denied the charges, and Perdium was dragged into a territorial dispute, suffering great losses. Events spiraled and worsened over time. He sensed a stench to it all, like goblin dung having left before the territorial war erupted. Ghislain did not know the detailed aftermath. His belated investigations gave only a rough idea of the major events initially. He thought Perdium was being crushed to prevent an uprising, targeting territories poised to resist. But learning that Aiden was involved in Perdium's fall made him suspect a deeper conspiracy. He questioned why anyone would destroy such a poor, worthless estate, especially since they would have to fend off the barbarians. In its place, hidden resources existed nearby, but no one knew of them at the time. He had checked repeatedly in his past life, wondering if that was the reason. Dismissive of the motive, Ghislain resolved to kill them all. His expression turned icy in his past life. He had sought revenge only against the Delphine Duchy, but now he intended to eliminate every enemy of Perdium. Regardless of who comprised Aiden's, we lost in thought. Ghislain tapped his fingers on his chin. He recalled that Elena and the knight's bodies had been found in the slums, a place they had no reason to visit during the festival. Someone had likely called or forced them there. One thing was clear: Elena's death had been the starting point for Perdium's downfall. If he corrected things from the start, it should be fine. With his thoughts organized, Ghislain left his room. He acknowledged the need to build up his body quickly, but time was short, only a week. He wandered around the estate, hardly remembering its layout or the faces of the servants. After so long away, people greeted him, but their expressions were indifferent or disdainful. He thought to himself that he was not that bad a person, though he was likely considered touchy and angry. As he wandered, someone ran toward him, gasping for breath. It was Fergus, the old knight who, despite his age, remained at the castle, faithfully guarding Ghislain. Fergus bowed heavily, panting from his exertion. Ghislain noted the old man's loyalty and wondered how far he had run. Fergus joked about Ghislain wandering alone and how Belinda had not known his whereabouts, prompting Fergus to search everywhere. Ghislain told him to stop calling him young master, but Fergus insisted he still looked like a child to his old eyes. Ghislain sighed, recalling that in his days as the Mercenary King, he had never imagined hearing such words. Fergus looked at him warmly, and Ghislain felt a twinge of guilt, remembering how he had rejected everyone except Fergus and Belinda. During his times of inferiority and anger overcome with emotion, Ghislain hugged Fergus tightly. He had intended to be subtle, but the joy of reuniting with someone precious was overwhelming. He told Fergus to live long, so they could live together, as dying was a miserable experience. Surprised, Fergus laughed and remarked that Ghislain was acting as if they had not seen each other in ages. Ghislain knew he could trust Fergus, the knight who had stood by him even when ridiculed for the orc subjugation incident. Resolved, Ghislain spoke seriously, telling Fergus that he had actually died and come back to life. Fergus laughed and asked him to stop joking, not believing the claim after all. Ghislain told Fergus to live long, as coming back from the dead was not easy. Fergus responded that he must live long enough to see Ghislain married. Ghislain chuckled bitterly, noting that now was not the time for love or marriage with the estate's ruin looming. He shook his head to clear his thoughts and walked purposefully toward the training grounds. Fergus hurried after him, asking where he was going so suddenly. Ghislain replied that he needed to train. Fergus clutched his chest in shock, exclaiming that Ghislain was going to train. Ghislain urged Fergus to pull himself together and breathe. Fergus struggled, but, thanks to Ghislain's quick chest compressions, managed to catch his breath and recover. Ghislain asked where Fergus had learned such a technique. Fergus dismissed that, warning Ghislain that he had nearly had his body and soul separated, and asked if he knew how hard it was to come back to life. Fergus blamed his weak old heart for acting up when startled. Ghislain clicked his tongue and massaged Fergus's hand, promising to brew mandrake root tea later and telling him to rest for now. Fergus insisted he should guard Ghislain, but Ghislain told him to rest, saying he was the one who should be guarded. Fergus then asked to stay by Ghislain's side while he trained, and Ghislain reluctantly agreed. Fergus's guarding was mostly symbolic. He trailed Ghislain around the castle like a babysitter, limited by his age and unable to perform much else. Ghislain wandered the castle to familiarize himself with the layout before heading to a private training ground. Seeing the dirty, abandoned area without guards or cleaning staff brought back memories. He recalled how, during his mercenary days, such a space for mana cultivation and training had been a distant dream. Reflecting on the difficulty of being away from home, he summoned a servant to clean the training area. When asked if he really planned to train, Ghislain confirmed he needed to put in the effort now. Fergus expressed genuine pleasure, knowing others would have dismissed Ghislain's intentions as empty boasts, but Fergus believed Ghislain was just going through a rough patch. While Fergus guarded the entrance, Ghislain entered and began his mana cultivation, determined to push himself as far as possible despite limited time. He had the knowledge and experience from his past life and was confident he could become strong faster than anyone else, but time was scarce. Ghislain judged 1 week as tight but not impossible. His current body was in terrible shape compared to his past life, making it impossible to transform into steel in such a short time. However, if he could control mana, he could dramatically enhance his body's performance. He resolved to reach at least the level where he could handle mana. Using his past experiences, he believed he could take on most knights even with his weak body. Mana began moving into Ghislain's body, gathering at the core just below his navel. He had progressed from being unable to sense mana to absorbing and converting it within moments. Some mana that couldn't settle dissipated as a red mist around him. Ghislain considered this wasteful, noting his mana cultivation technique was still incomplete. He had modified the family's technique to suit himself, adjusting it to fit his body. His technique was intense and fast but lacked stability, refined through real combat, and had allowed him to become a powerhouse in his past life. He recalled that reaching the continent's top 7 was partly due to a magic tome found in an ancient ruin, an old, tattered, incomplete book without a name that inspired him to recreate his mana cultivation technique. Mana began gathering in Ghislain's right chest, forming a new core. Unlike others who used only the natural core in their bodies, Ghislain created additional cores in different locations. Another core formed in his left chest. Together with the core below his navel, the 3 cores formed an inverted triangle, circulating mana rapidly. This unique feature of Ghislain's technique allowed him to unleash explosive power, which had earned him the title of Mercenary King. He concentrated, suppressing the resistance and willing the mana to remain under control, resolving to work on this gradually. The technique consumed mana at an astounding rate. In his previous life, with vast mana reserves, he had little trouble against equals, but now his situation was different. He planned to use his limited mana efficiently, unleashing power only at crucial moments. Ghislain confirmed that 3 cores were the limit for now. Even with 3, he could take on most knights rather than increasing the number of cores. He focused on stabilizing the mana. In his Mercenary King days, he had controlled a maximum of 5 cores, but the burden increased several times with each additional core. Beyond 5, his body wouldn't handle it. The amount of mana stored in the 3 cores wasn't ideal but was the best he could manage for now. He had no intention of being satisfied with this state forever and intended to perfect his incomplete technique and become even stronger. His strength was fueled by vengeance and anger in his previous life. He became one of the strongest only by enduring grueling training for revenge. To keep that fire alive, he constantly reminded himself of his final moments. He thought of the noble knight Aiden, who had come after him with his entire knight order when Ghislain was already exhausted. Ghislain furrowed his brow, growing angrier as he recalled that if they had fought 1-on-1, he would have won. One of Ghislain's last friends, known as the One-Man Army and an Archmage, would tease him now and then. Jamal teased Ghislain, reminding him that he was ranked 3rd while Ghislain was 7th, implying he was. He resolved that this time, he would not just be among the top 7 but become the strongest on the continent. Even in his past life, he had never accepted losing to any of the other top 7, believing the outcome uncertain until they fought, and suspected the others felt the same, except for one, the continent's finest sword. Widely regarded as the strongest among them, Ghislain had instinctively felt overwhelmed by that colossal strength and recalled it with a chill, doubting even now if he could overcome such a formidable opponent. Yet, he scolded himself for such fear, reminding himself that the finest sword of that era was formidable but not to be feared. Now, with the vitality of youth and the knowledge and experience from his past life, Ghislain believed he could succeed. His priority remained to prevent the downfall of his estate and family, but he also needed the ambition to become the best to truly hone his skills. He vowed to crush all his enemies, annihilate the Delphine Duchy and its backers, and become the strongest. Gritting his teeth, Ghislain's eyes glowed red. Ghislain dedicated himself to building his strength until the festival began, training diligently while also trying to spend time with Elena, sharing meals and conversation whenever possible. Still a bit awkward, Elena slowly accepted the changes in him, and their relationship improved. When Elena asked if he had been training again, Ghislain admitted he couldn't slack off as the heir to a knight's family. Elena reminded him that he had once mocked such efforts, claiming he could just give orders and let others handle things. Ghislain shrugged, recalling his past complaints but not their specifics. Elena noted that even their father had complained, wishing to dump the estate on Ghislain and retreat to the countryside. Ghislain admitted he had been quite a burden. Elena suggested that if he put in the effort, perhaps Perhaps their father would be happy upon his return. Ghislaine responded uncertainly. Their father, Count Perdium, was currently on an expedition to the north, leaving only a small garrison to guard the estate. Ghislaine realized that the festival, held during such a vulnerable time, was an ideal opportunity for outside forces to strike and escape. His past life, he had not considered this, but now it reinforced his belief that Elena's death had not been a coincidence. He told Elena he was off to train, and she muttered, watching him head back to the training ground, wondering how long it would last this time. On the day of the festival, Ghislaine fastened his sword at his waist and went to Elena's room. Elena, just about to leave, looked at him curiously and asked if he was not training today and if he was joining the festival. Ghislaine suggested they go together, surprising Elena, who asked what had gotten into him. He replied that they should enjoy a festival now and then. Elena remarked that he was acting strange and instructed her maids to take a break, deciding to leave them behind since they still felt uneasy around Ghislaine. As he escorted her, Ghislaine reflected that this was different from before. In his past life, Elena had invited him to the festival to lift his spirits, but now, since his behavior had changed, she had not felt the need to ask. He realized that his actions influenced those around him, subtly changing the future. Though big events might remain the same, he would have to respond to minor changes as they arose. He knew enemies targeted the Perdium family, but how they attacked could shift with his interference. Even with knowledge of the future, he had to adapt it to the present and could not afford any mistakes. Perhaps his presence had already changed the course of events. After a while, Elena stretched and complained that the festival was fun but the same every year, a bit boring. Just then, one of her knights approached and whispered, suggesting they go somewhere else. Elena asked where, and the knight, Jamal, who had been her personal guard for years and was well regarded in the castle, smiled, and said he had heard of a special show a bit outside the main area, though he did not know the details but said it was supposed to be quite stimulating. Elena eagerly agreed to go see it, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Ghislaine glanced at Jamal's face, realizing he had been pondering various possibilities about how Elena had encountered an accident, including the existence of a traitor within the castle. He had suspected even the escort knights, but to think it would be Jamal, who had protected Elena for so long, shocked him. Jamal asked Ghislaine if he wanted to see for himself, and Ghislaine nodded lightly. Following Jamal and Elena, they wove through the bustling crowd and soon arrived at a quieter area leading into the slums. Though it took a while, Elena was thrilled by the prospect of seeing something new and walked eagerly. The gloomy atmosphere of the slums frightened her slightly, but with Jamal by her side, she did not seem too worried. Ghislaine quietly observed the other escort knight, Philip, noting his flushed face in silence as he walked alongside them, which seemed awkward. In his past life, Elena, Philip, and Jamal had all been found dead. If both knights were traitors, the reason for their deaths was obvious: they must have been silenced. Price of involvement in a dangerous plot to kill the Lord's daughter was high, usually risking one's own life, but it seemed neither had considered that risk fully. When they arrived at an open space, Jamal exclaimed with slight excitement. The area was surrounded by rundown houses showing signs of wear and tear, with debris and garbage cluttering every path. Ghislaine understood the heaps of trash were intentional obstacles, cleverly blocking escape routes. Elena frowned, angry that after coming all this way, the surroundings were disappointing. As her tone sharpened, Jamal quickly waved his hand, explaining that everything was not ready yet, but soon people would come to show something incredible. Elena scoffed, said forget it, and told Ghislaine they were going back. Elena remained cautious despite speaking calmly, her unease evident. She had trusted her longtime escort knight but was led to a place filled with trash, confirming her suspicions. Jamal stepped before Elena with a sly smile, asking if it would be a waste to leave without seeing the sights. Elena ordered to leave immediately. Jamal urged her to wait a little longer. Elena called out to Philip angrily, but he silently joined Jamal without protest. Fear gripped Elena as she clung tightly to Ghislaine's arm. Sensing betrayal, she questioned why they were doing this, her voice trembling. Jamal chuckled and explained he bore no grudge and had accepted a better offer, regretting only that he would not see her again. Blending easily into a crowd, the middle-aged man confirmed with Jamal that the young man was the Perdium family heir, noting he was not part of the deal. Jamal shrugged, calling him a bonus gift. The middle-aged man nodded, instructing his men to block the escape routes. Elena looked around in horror and demanded an explanation. Jamal laughed, stating his job was only to bring her there. What happened next was up to the others, whether to sell her as a slave or kill her. Ghislaine stepped forward, accusing Jamal of betrayal and warning he would not get away with it. Jamal remained unconcerned, saying they would take the money and flee the estate, tired of constant fighting. He mocked the young lord, calling him bad luck but acknowledging he had saved some lives by preventing maids from coming along. Jamal expressed mild regret but insisted there was no other way. He approached the middle-aged man with a smug grin, while Philip looked somber, seemingly feeling guilt. Jamal challenged the man for being light-handed, reminding him they were both knights. The middle-aged man produced a piece of paper, explaining it was a credit note from the Northern Merchant Guild, more convenient than carrying gold. Jamal scoffed, preferring gold coins and threatening to hunt the man down if the note was fake. The man assured him it was genuine. Jamal reluctantly accepted the paper and used his mana to verify it, his eyes widening when he saw it was merely an invitation to a distant ball. Enraged, Jamal shouted and reached for his sword, but the middle-aged man quietly drew a dagger and stabbed him in the stomach repeatedly. Jamal gasped in pain as the man taunted him for disliking balls. As Jamal collapsed, clutching his wound, Philip drew his sword and charged at the attacker. The middle-aged man blocked Philip's attack with ease, exchanged a few blows, then swiftly sliced Philip's throat with mana, causing him to choke on blood and collapse. The man stepped forward and beheaded Philip, turning back to Jamal. Still bleeding, the man ignored Jamal's pleas for mercy and executed him as well. After disposing of both knights, the middle-aged man lit a cigarette and addressed Elena and Ghislain, exhaling smoke. Elena clutched Ghislain's arm tightly. Trembling, she tried to pull him away, urging escape, but Ghislain shook his head and told her to let go, commenting on her surprising strength. He smiled and attempted to free his arm, which remained firmly held. Elena asked how he was so strong. Shocked, the middle-aged man chuckled, remarking that rumors about Perdium's heir being unhinged seemed true. Ignoring the mockery, Ghislain began releasing his mana in fine threads, extending it across the space. Though unable to claim the entire area as his domain like in his past life, he spread his mana thin and wide, a skill few knights possessed. His precise mana control confirmed no hidden enemies nearby. Confident, Ghislain gently freed Elena's grip from his arm and asked the middle-aged man's name. Flicking his pipe, the man introduced himself as Frank, inviting curses in the afterlife. Ghislain noted the name was not local and asked who had sent him. Frank refused to answer at his signal. The two men blocking the exits moved closer. One of them turned to Frank, awaiting orders. Frank considered briefly before replying with detached precision that beheading was too ordinary and ordered to make a mess of their bodies to enrage Count Perdium, insisting they keep Ghislain and Elena alive as long as. Blood rushed to his head, his face burning with fury as his hands trembled and breath quickened. Frank smirked at Ghislain's trembling hand, dismissing him as a pathetic kid, but noticed something strange. Ghislain was smiling with eyes glinting with frightening madness. Brushing off his unease, Frank signaled his subordinates to attack, calling Ghislain insane and telling them to get it over with. The two men advanced, causing Elena to step back in fear and cry out Ghislain's name in desperation. Ghislain muttered softly that he had finally found them and had been waiting for this moment. Without hesitation, he lunged forward, grasping one man's neck, piercing his throat with his fingers until blood gushed out, soaking the man's clothes. Man dropped his sword, trembling as Ghislain pulled his blood-covered hand close to the man's face and spoke ecstatically about how long he had waited for this moment, then flung the man backward, decapitating him. As the lifeless body fell onto a nearby pile of garbage, the other man rushed to attack, swinging his sword, but Ghislain dodged lightly and tapped the blade's side with the back of his hand, flinging the attacker's sword. Crushed under Ghislain's fist, Ghislain slowly straightened, locking eyes with Frank, whose face hardened in shock and fear. Frank, frozen by the speed and power of Ghislain's attack, felt a chill run through his body, recognizing a beast starved for blood unlike anyone he had killed before. Frank realized their intelligence had been completely wrong. He suspected Ghislain had used mana, amazed that someone so young could wield it with such strength and speed. Frank concluded that if this was Ghislain's first time killing, then he was a born murderer and resolved to punish the intelligence department for their mistakes. Elena, stunned by the brutal scene, shuddered but felt relief that her brother was strong enough to protect them, wondering if he had gained such strength after only a few days of training. Ghislain fully straightened and drew his sword, telling Frank that whether he hid his skill was none of Frank's concern and demanding to know who had ordered the attack. Frank refused to answer, insisting Ghislain did not need to know and warning that despite his impressive skills, he would die there. Ghislain nodded, acknowledging that villains rarely answered easily, and Frank warned him not to get cocky, claiming Ghislain's lack of experience meant he could not beat him. Ghislain smirked and raised his sword, signaling the start of the battle. Ghislain launched the first attack, and Frank blocked and immediately retaliated, their swords clashing fiercely. Lena clasped her hands in worry, feeling helpless and anxious, unsure whether to call for help or flee, but she chose to step back quietly, prepared to call for help if the situation became desperate. As the fight intensified, Ghislain recognized Frank as a skilled knight who wielded mana with a level of expertise far above most knights, explaining why Frank had ventured into Perdium's territory confidently. Ghislain realized that with only a week's worth of mana accumulated, he could not keep up with Frank for long and was relying solely on his exceptional swordsmanship to endure. Frank, in turn, began to realize that Gislin's swordsmanship was brutal, practical, and almost awe-inspiring, unlike that of a typical knight or even the Perdium family style. Gislin's sword strikes were brutal and unpredictable, targeting vital areas in unexpected ways that no knight would employ. Frank recognized that this was not the Perdium family swordsmanship and wondered how Gislin had learned such a technique at his age. To Frank, Gislin's skill was leagues beyond his own, and without the physical strength granted by his mana-enhanced body, he would have been dead already. Despite this, Frank resolved to win and gathered more mana, aiming to end the fight quickly as the battle continued. Gislin's body accumulated wounds. When Frank's sword clanged against Gislin's, their eyes locked. Gislin sought to identify if Frank's superiors were involved and speculated whether Duke Delphine or Count Desmond was behind this, noting that Count Desmond managed the northern territories under Duke Delphine's orders. Although it seemed unlikely Duke Delphine would focus so intently on Perdium, Gislin concluded that whoever was responsible was part of the same scheme. Frank's brief shock confirmed this before he masked his reaction and resumed his assault, acknowledging Gislin as a dangerous man. This confirmation steeled his resolve to end the conflict. Their swords clashed again, producing a harsh metallic ring. Gislin grinned through clenched teeth, stating there was nothing more to confirm and that it was time to finish the fight. Mana, the red glow around Gislin's blade intensified beyond Frank's, forcing Frank to groan in pain as Gislin pushed back his sword with a cruel smile. Gislin confessed that he had spent his life regretting his ignorance of the true villain, and that if he had known, he would have found and killed them. Frank likely could not comprehend these words, but Gislin's regret lingered, especially regarding Elena's death. Now returned to the past, Gislin felt that all his pain and anger transformed into joy at the chance to sever the root of his nightmares. He activated his third core, unleashing mana several times his normal strength and forcing Frank backward. Frank staggered, shocked by the inexplicable surge of power. Gislin's strength was on a different level, and Frank's confusion grew as he realized Gislin had not hidden his strength from the beginning, given the injuries he had endured. Gislin seized Frank's momentary hesitation and urged him to give his all. In a sudden burst, Gislin closed the distance, swinging his sword with tremendous speed. Frank barely blocked the strike and was immediately hit by a relentless barrage of blows. Gislin's eyes glowed red as he pressed forward with ferocity, forcing Frank to retreat step by step. Frank was outmatched in speed, strength, and skill, unable to recover as Gislin advanced like a storm. Gislin knew he could only maintain this power for a few minutes and had to end the fight quickly. Gislin directed his mana to collide with Frank's core, a dangerous move that could cause a massive explosion but would shatter the core if successful. Frank collapsed, powerless, unable to believe that someone of Gislin's age could break the core of a knight of his caliber. Gislin's precise mana manipulation was unlike anything Frank had ever seen. Leaving Frank trembling on the ground, Gislin turned away. Elena swallowed nervously as Gislin approached her, his bloodied figure enveloped in a crimson haze that resembled a devil and instilled terror. She marveled at his skill, knowing Frank had been a formidable knight even by her standards. Gislin's strength, demonstrated by his ability to defeat Jamal and Philip alone, indicated he could easily handle most knights, yet he had triumphed over such formidable opponents. Elena recalled the rumors that had circulated just days before in Perdium Castle about Gislin's prowess. When Elena asked Gislin if it was true that he had defeated those orcs, he responded only with a smile and told her to rest. Before she could react, Gislin gently touched the back of Elena's neck, causing her to collapse like a puppet with its strings cut. Without any mana of her own, she was unable to detect or resist his action. Gislin carefully laid her down in a nearby abandoned house and then returned to Frank. Gislin declared that the best part had come. Frank asked why he had been kept alive, insisting he would never reveal anything even under torture. Gislin replied that he already knew who was behind the plot and had no questions for someone like Frank. When Frank pressed why he was still alive, Gislin knelt and looked him in the eyes, noting that Frank's cold killing of many people showed he was an expert at butchery without emotion. Gislin suggested that sometimes torturing someone was necessary, not out of necessity but to release pent-up anger. Frank tried to bite his tongue, but Gislin quickly grabbed his jaw and stuffed a torn piece of Frank's clothing into his mouth. Gislin expressed disappointment that Frank, who had killed without hesitation, was now afraid of pain as Frank struggled. Gislin severed the tendons in his limbs with a swift slice. Gislin claimed that when consumed by rage, nothing was more exhilarating than succeeding in vengeance. Frank could not comprehend Gislin's words, as their plan had yet to be executed. Gislin seemed to have known about their existence all along. As Frank remained silent, Gislin muttered that returning to the past was a blessing, but the despairing memories and anger still burned within him, and they would only fade once every last enemy was eliminated. He declared that coexistence was impossible. Fear filled Frank's eyes as as he recognized the madness in Gislin's gaze, an expression only someone who had killed as easily as breathing could possess. Doubt crossed Frank's mind about whether someone Gislin's age could have such experience, but Gislin's next words shattered his thoughts. He asked if they should begin, promising it would be exhilarating since he had tested everything on himself, warning Frank that everyone else would suffer the same fate. A sharp fragment slowly dug into Frank's neck as Gislin warned that Frank would not die easily because he had messed with the wrong person. The torture ended only when Frank lost his sanity and died from the pain. Gislin looked down at the mangled corpse and chuckled, acknowledging that the heavy weight in his heart had finally lifted and the dark, burning flame within him had dimmed slightly. He admitted it felt good and made breathing easier, though many flames still burned within him, and only after extinguishing them all would he find true freedom. Suddenly, Gislin bent over and vomited a mouthful of blood, though he had held back during Frank's torture. His internal injuries were severe from the backlash of forcing all 3 mana cores to explode simultaneously. Tapping them with the hilt of his sword, he cautiously opened them to reveal the corpse of a young man, Gilmore Dygald, the heir of Count Dygald's territory. Gilmore had been notorious for his love of women, drinking, and drugs, and had been blamed for Elena's death when his body was found. This misunderstanding had sparked a costly conflict between the territories of Dygald and Perdium. Gislin realized the enemy's objective had been to incite a war between the 2 territories. Having fallen for this scheme in his past life, he resolved that this time would be different. He examined the remaining sacks, which contained the bodies of men likely to be Gilmore's escort knights, identified by the crests on their breastplates. If these deaths became public, they would cause the same issues as before, Perdium attacking Dygald in revenge for Elena's death or vice versa. Though he had saved Elena, Gislin knew he could not prevent a territorial war, but he refused to let his enemies succeed. He gathered burnable items and stacked them beside the bodies, then used mana to crush identifying objects like Gilmore's ring and the knights' crests. He dragged Frank's and the subordinates' bodies over and set everything ablaze. The flames roared, releasing a foul stench as they consumed the remains. Even if bones remained, people would assume a vagrant had burned to death, a common occurrence in that era. Gislin watched the flames spread, consuming surrounding debris and trash. Feeling relieved he had handled the matter himself, he had prepared a signal flare and instructed Fergus to ready soldiers if needed, but avoided involving them to prevent rumors about Gilmore Dygald's death. He acknowledged that he had prevented the territorial war for now and bought himself some time. He had stopped Elena's death and the conflict it would have triggered, the beginning of everything in his previous life. Gislin vowed not to let events unfold as his enemies wished. He steadied himself, picked up Elena, and headed back to the castle. Upon their return, Perdium Castle was in an uproar over the grave incident of an escort knight attempting to kill the lord's daughter. Baron Homern, the butler acting on behalf of the lord, raged furiously. The butler ordered a thorough inspection and mental training for all knights and soldiers, forbidding their participation in the upcoming festival. Instructed that the lord be informed immediately, the castle fell silent as people gathered in small groups, whispering rumors. Some claimed Jamal and Philip had gone insane, and that young Lord Gislin had dealt with them himself. Others dismissed the story as a fabrication by the young lady to make Gislin look good. Some speculated that Jamal and Philip had fought to the death over the young lady's favor, and that Gislin had merely survived by luck. Now pretending to be a hero, accusations spread that Scoven and the young lady were liars, and that Gislin had forced her to lie. Elena, already shaken by recent events, grew more despondent as no one believed her, and she was branded one of the estate's 2 great liars alongside Scoven, bound by a promise to Gislin not to reveal anything about Frank. She remained silent. Gislin heard the rumors and laughed quietly to himself, thinking that if he admitted to dealing with Frank, nobody would believe him, especially with Gilmore involved. After a few days, Elena's spirits lifted thanks to the comfort and support of those around her. Watching her return to her cheerful self, Gislin felt relief and began to consider his next moves. He knew that although he had stopped the attackers once, they would strike again once their plan failed. In his previous life, Perdium had been drawn into endless conflicts that led to its ruin. The Delphine Duchy had weakened neighboring territories, overthrown the kingdom, and seized power. Gislin still did not understand why they targeted Perdium, but knew he had to prepare. He realized he needed to organize training, secure funds, manpower, loyal allies, and perhaps even some luxuries, though he dismissed the latter as irrelevant. He understood he could not prevent every plot or attack alone and needed to build power and a solid foundation quickly. Gislin acknowledged that money was the key to everything, both in this life and the last. He needed funds to recruit people, secure resources, and sustain his efforts. However, Perdium was one of the poorest territories in the kingdom, and he lacked access to its limited funds. He searched for a quick solution but found none. He wanted to use his memories from his past life to earn money but needed some starting capital, which he did not have. Time was short, and slow wealth building was not an option. He considered asking for money but doubted anyone would agree. Returning to mercenary work would take too long. Banditry might be faster, but was beneath him. Ghislain sat crouched in a small garden, absent-mindedly plucking flower petals as he pondered how to quickly gather initial capital. At that moment, Cain Loges approached with a group of knights. Cain, Ghislain's cousin and heir to Loges County, was a large, strong young man known for his confidence and boldness. Though Cain was Ghislain's only friend at this age, he also bullied him relentlessly. Cain laughed loudly, mocking Ghislain for the rumors that he had lost his mind and was spreading lies on a grand scale. Ghislain's eyes widened as he recognized Cain's boisterous presence. Cain sneered, reminding Ghislain of the rumors that he had become insane. Ghislain stood quietly as Cain brushed off his pants and approached him, whispering about preparations Cain had demanded in previous visits: alcohol and women to celebrate together, though their friendship was one-sided, with Ghislain merely a tool for Cain's amusement. Cain patted Ghislain's cheek, smirking, and suggested they drink and have fun that night, implying they would cause trouble as usual. Cain was notorious for harassing maids and beating soldiers without cause, and with the count often away, he roamed the castle freely, using his family ties as a shield. Ghislain, the territory's heir, acted as Cain's subordinate, leaving Cain untroubled when Ghislain remained silent. Cain shouted at him, questioning his slow responses and accusing him of being out of it or having eaten something bad. Cain leaned in close, snarling, until his escort knights intervened, whispering that many were watching and suggesting they calm down and speak elsewhere. Knights, aware of the potential scandal, pretended to restrain Cain but intended to let him vent his frustrations in private. Ghislain rolled his eyes at the absurd situation. He considered that Cain was too far beneath him to waste time fighting and, having maintained his dignity as the Mercenary King for years, felt awkward resorting to violence against his own cousin. No one had dared to pick fights with Ghislain for a long time, as his subordinates usually handled such matters. He realized he would need to recruit a reliable subordinate soon, acknowledging that while it was foolish to respond to every taunt from a child, ignoring it entirely was unbefitting of the Mercenary King. Ghislain shot a subtle glare at Cain and, after a brief pause, decided to try the flower petal fortune, telling he had recently found amusing. Picking up a flower, he began pulling off the petals to divine Cain's fate, muttering to himself whether to hit him or not. Cain frowned at Ghislain's strange behavior and asked what he was doing. Ghislain replied that Cain was lucky and, since he was a guest, he would let him off this time, crediting the petals for that. Cain blinked in confusion before snapping back to his senses and accused Ghislain of being crazy and taking his frustrations out on those weaker than him. His words grew harsher, and even the passing servants stopped to watch the scene unfold. Cain did not hold back, taunting Ghislain for lying about beating a knight and questioning whether anyone would respect him for such lies. Ghislain remained silent, realizing how much he had changed since his past self would have hit Cain immediately for the insult. He reminded himself to be patient and not fall for a kid's provocation. Suddenly, Cain shouted an insult, and Ghislain's right hand moved like lightning, delivering a swift blow to Cain's face. Cain clutched his face in shock and screamed at Ghislain, who looked down at his hand with fascination, surprised that it had acted on its own. Cain staggered back, his face flushed red, and drew his sword, threatening to kill Ghislain. His escort knights rushed in, panicked, with one whispering urgently that too many eyes were watching. Servants, maids, and soldiers had gathered, murmuring and observing the scene. Cain gritted his teeth and questioned whether he should hold back after being humiliated in front of everyone. Cain nodded, deciding a duel was better. Hoping to humiliate Ghislain publicly and possibly cripple him, he immediately took off his glove and threw it toward Ghislain's face. Ghislain dodged lightly, causing Cain's face to contort in rage as he accused Ghislain of spreading lies about beating Jamal and Philip, tarnishing the dignity of nobility, and daring to attack him when questioned. Ghislain's eyes widened at the declaration and asked if Cain was serious about a duel with him. Cain confirmed, stating that everyone was watching and Ghislain could not run away now. Ghislain felt a strange sensation, realizing he could not remember the last time he had dueled. He recalled that even Aiden, one of the continent's top 7 powerhouses, had played it safe by teaming up for their final fight. Despite that, this brat dared to challenge him to a duel. Ghislain decided to go with the flow, acknowledging that since coming back, he had been overthinking everything and needed to adjust. He remembered that the Loges County had sided with Perdium during the territorial wars and eventually fallen alongside them, with Cain going missing afterward. In his previous life, Ghislain had gathered information up to that point but lost interest, as his own ambitions left little room for childhood memories to become trauma. Though Cain was hopeless, Count Loges had shown loyalty. Ghislain resolved to teach Cain a lesson out of respect for Count Loges, believing this was the age to receive proper guidance and come to one's senses, something he had learned the hard way himself. Ghislain tossed his glove straight at Cain's face. Cain scoffed and tried to dodge, but the glove changed trajectory and hit him square in the face. People around them stifled laughter as Cain's face flushed red. Ghislain spoke calmly, accepting the duel duel and mentioning that he had been preoccupied with financial plans, so he had been going to let it go. Suddenly remembering something, a mischievous grin spread across Gislin's face as he demanded Cain repay the money he owed him. Cain protested, claiming he never borrowed money and that any money Gislin gave him was out of gratitude for friendship, calling it a friendship fee. Gislin thought this ridiculous but shook his head as memories became clearer. He recalled that he had not wanted to give the money but had no choice with Cain's fists raised. Gislin insisted that after the duel, Cain would have to pay back the debt, even if he did not want to, raising his fist and grinning, saying that after a few hits, people seemed to find money they did not know they had. Cain gritted his teeth and growled that Gislin had lost his mind and warned him to get ready to lick his boots while crying. Two then headed to the training grounds, hearing that a duel was about to take place. People flocked to the arena. The crowd had gathered at the training grounds, hoping to witness the hot-tempered young lord, Cain, get beaten, a rare spectacle in Perdium. Even a few off-duty knights had shown up among them. Gislin spotted Skovin, his nose red and unsteady on his feet, visibly drunk. Skovin had tried to tell people about Gislin's accomplishments during the subjugation, but no one believed him, accusing him instead of currying favor with the heir. As a result, he had earned disgraceful titles like the Lying Knight and the Knight Who Lost His Honor, and had since drowned himself in alcohol, losing all will. Gislin felt a pang of sympathy and thought to himself that those disgraceful titles would soon be gone. Gislin and Cain did not start the duel immediately. They waited for enough spectators to gather, as was customary. In Perdium, where entertainment was scarce, even duels were eagerly anticipated events. Once a decent crowd had assembled, one of the knights stepped forward and announced that they could begin. The crowd started betting on the winner, but everyone bet on Cain. Some suggested changing the betting pool to wager on how long Cain could last instead. As the knight was about to alter the rules, a slurred voice interrupted. Skovin, looking uninterested, set down his bottle without replying, then reached into his coat, pulled out a pouch full of coins, and threw it down. The knight who caught the pouch smirked and asked what it was. For Skovin, eyes red with determination, declared that he was putting his entire fortune on the young lord and told anyone scared to go home. He then asked if anyone else wanted to bet on the young lord. Since everyone else had bet on Cain, they would have to split Skovin's stake. Knight hesitated briefly, noting the shadows under her eyes, then accepted the money eagerly. Elena's contribution, combined with Skovin's, finally satisfied the crowd. As Elena sat on a chair her maids had prepared, her gaze met Skovin's, and they shared a silent understanding. Like Skovin, Elena had been branded a liar and accused of inflating Gislin's accomplishments. The frustration of being doubted had kept her awake at night. While they exchanged glances, the duel finally began. Gislin swung his sword through the air and then pointed it at Cain, challenging him to come at him, stating it was cowardly for a skilled fighter to attack a weaker opponent first. Cain, enraged, raised his sword and charged. Their duel resembled a bullfight, with their swords clashing fiercely. Cain poured all his strength into his attack, glaring at Gislin with killing intent, determined to make him a cripple for his insolence. Cain believed a good beating would cure Gislin's madness, but Gislin thought the same. As their swords clashed repeatedly, Gislin assessed Cain's strength and build, concluding he could beat him without much worry. Cain's size and strength were impressive, likely surpassing many trained knights, so Gislin focused on testing Cain's swordsmanship. Crowd gasped as Gislin handled his sword with ease. Even Cain was shocked. The last time they sparred, Gislin had struggled to block a single strike, but now he blocked or dodged Cain's attacks effortlessly. While Cain grunted and swung his sword, the crowd marveled at Gislin's display, whispering that the young lord had improved and questioning if Cain was weaker. Some noted that less skilled fighters tended to fight more showily. Cain's face turned red with frustration, realizing he had not landed a single hit despite his plans to crush Gislin instantly. Gislin stepped back and smiled, declaring he would make the duel more interesting. The crowd looked at him curiously as he sheathed his sword and held up empty hands, announcing he would fight barehanded because the skill gap was too large to be fun otherwise. Cain's face flushed with rage at this taunt, but Gislin ignored him and raised his hands to the crowd, encouraging them to cheer. The crowd erupted with laughter and excitement, praising the young lord's improvement and declaring anyone could win. While duels between knights or nobles were usually solemn and serious, Gislin's showmanship made the spectacle far more entertaining. He glanced at the crowd and promised that if he won, he would buy everyone drinks and meat though he had no money. This was how he had learned to live as a mercenary, showing off skills, drawing attention, and swaying. As the crowd roared, Cain ground his teeth and accused Gislin of turning a sacred duel into a circus. The atmosphere shifted into a lively marketplace, and Cain felt like nothing more than a gladiator on display. Gislin clicked his tongue and mocked the flustered Cain, questioning the notion of a sacred duel and whether the temple had sponsored him. He challenged Cain's dignity as a noble, taunting that if Cain kept talking, Gislin could defeat him with just one finger. The crowd erupted in laughter at Gislin's wagging finger anger, their mood shifting from witnessing a formal duel to watching a street fight. Spectators commented on the change in Kane's personality, finding the fight more entertaining. This way, the usual pitiful image of Ghislain vanished, replaced by anticipation of his next move. Provoked by the cheers and Ghislain's insults, Kane lost composure and shouted a threat to kill him. Ghislain responded by lunging forward and slapping Kane across the head, leaving Kane groaning in pain and unable to fend himself. Kane staggered backward, clutching his head, then charged at Ghislain with a furious roar. Ghislain dodged effortlessly and began pummeling Kane relentlessly. Kane could barely utter insults or land blows as Ghislain struck repeatedly. The crowd watched with admiration, noting Ghislain's graceful yet fierce movements and mastery beyond expectations for a young noble. Even the knights were impressed by his dynamic control. The crowd cheered instinctively, thrilled by each blow Ghislain landed and relishing Kane's comeuppance, since Kane was disliked for causing trouble. Sensing the crowd's support, Ghislain decided to deliver the final blow. He smiled wickedly at the bruised, teary Kane and warned him to bite down to avoid losing his tongue. With a thunderous punch to Kane's stomach, Ghislain sent him flying across the training grounds, slamming into the far wall and cracking it. The knights looked on in disbelief, unable to sense any mana despite the power of the strike. In truth, Ghislain had briefly infused his fist with mana, withdrawing it immediately, a display of mastery only a true expert could achieve. The crowd erupted in cheers, declaring Ghislain the winner of the duel. But Ghislain was not finished. He remarked that Kane was still alive and hadn't surrendered, so he would continue. Approaching the fallen Kane, Ghislain mocked him as Kane tried to speak. When Kane attempted to surrender, Ghislain struck him square in the face. Kane clutched his face and rolled on the ground. Bewildered by Ghislain's sudden skill, Ghislain resumed his brutal assault, landing blow after blow. The crowd's admiration shifted to concern, murmuring about whether Ghislain would kill Kane and if someone should intervene. Kane gasped for mercy between punches, but Ghislain showed no mercy, following his rule from his mercenary days to never leave a fight half done. An escort knight rushed forward to stop the fight, stepping in front of Ghislain. Ghislain's sword appeared at the knight's throat before anyone noticed, and with a chilling smile, he accused the knight of volunteering to take Kane's place. The knight nervously reminded Ghislain that the fight was already decided and begged him to stop. Ghislain dismissed Kane as weak and declared he would end the fight. Turning to the knight, Ghislain demanded repayment of the money Kane owed him. The knight explained Kane had no money on him and would need to return to his estate, promising payment by the end of the month. Though the debt was less than 100 gold, Ghislain now demanded 1,000 gold with interest and penalties. The knight found this unfair but agreed. Fearing Ghislain's wrath, Ghislain added that Kane would also have to treat everyone present to drinks and meat, a cost separate from the debt and a price for losing. The knight, disgruntled but powerless, accepted the terms. Ghislain smirked at the silence and pressed the knight to finalize the arrangements. Then he sheathed his sword and grabbed Kane by the collar. Barely conscious, Kane begged for mercy. Ghislain chuckled, saying he would not kill Kane because he couldn't die until he paid his debt. Kane called him a devil, and Ghislain replied that Kane should be grateful the fight ended here, calling it an education. He ordered the knight to take Kane for treatment. The knight hoisted Kane onto his back and left the training grounds. Spectators, relieved, began clapping and cheering, admiring Ghislain's impressive duel and satisfied to see the despicable Kane receive his comeuppance. They praised Ghislain as the best and marveled at his unexpected strength. The crowd erupted in cheers as someone shouted for drinks and meat to celebrate. The knights turned to Scoven with serious expressions, confirming the truth of the matter. Scoven drained the last of his drink, grinning triumphantly, while Elena stood beside him, her chin raised proudly as if a burden had lifted despite Ghislain heading back toward the castle. The cheering continued unabated. He waved reluctantly to the crowd, his eyes meeting Scoven's, who raised his bottle in a silent toast. Ghislain responded with a thumbs up and a grin. Elena whispered to the maid beside her that Scoven had been right, then hurried to catch up with Ghislain, calling out to him. She quickly linked her arm with his, addressing him casually since the festival incident, asking what he needed all that money for, her eyes shining with curiosity. Ghislain smiled and tried to brush her off, but Elena clung tightly to his arm, teasing him about his strength and guessing he planned to buy a gift for Amelia, his fiancée, whose birthday was approaching. Ghislain's thoughts turned to Amelia, the daughter of Count Rayfold, recalling the political alliance their engagement symbolized. He remembered that, in his previous life, after he had run away, the engagement had been broken off and the Rayfold family had been glad to see it end. He realized he could use this connection to secure the money he needed for his ventures, deciding to get it from Amelia, whom he regarded as a traitor responsible for financially tormenting Perdium by cutting off support. Ghislain recalled how Amelia had instigated a rebellion to take her father's position, how he had destroyed Rayfold estate but failed to capture her, and how she had harassed him relentlessly during the subsequent war. Though he had planned to crush them eventually, he now decided to squeeze as much as possible from Rayfold before they became outright fight enemies. He addressed Elena, telling her to pick out some clothes and accessories she liked, offering 5 gold coins. Elena eagerly accepted, grateful for the gift. Ghislain chuckled and sent Elena off, then hurried to find Belinda to discuss his plans. He asked Belinda when his father would return, and she replied that since his father had begun withdrawing forces after the incident. The young lady, it would take about a week. Ghislain said he would be back before his father arrived, and revealed he was going to Rayfold Estate. Belinda teased him about his feelings for Amelia, but he dismissed her comments. When Belinda asked why he was leaving in such a hurry, Ghislain explained he needed to return before his father to discuss matters. He then insisted on accompanying him, arranging a few guards to maintain appearances since they were visiting Count Rayfold's estate. Ghislain agreed, acknowledging that traveling alone into potentially hostile territory was unwise given his current strength. After a brief wait, Belinda appeared wearing a black cloak, a departure from her usual practical attire. She revealed the same outfit underneath, with rows of daggers strapped inside. Ghislain marveled at her skills, recalling how she had once bested knights who had tried to harass her, earning a reputation that kept others from bothering her. No one knew why someone so skilled served as a maid at their remote estate, only that she had accompanied his late mother when she came to Perdium. Together, they prepared to depart for Rayfold Estate. Ghislain instructed Belinda to ensure her cloak was fastened properly, warning that they would be riding hard and needed to take care. He helped her tighten it securely. A faint smile crossed Belinda's face as she observed this more mature side of Ghislain, recalling how he used to be irritable. She reflected on how he had grown, noting that although he still acted strangely at times, he was much improved. She remembered how his skills had advanced enough to defeat Cain, and felt proud as someone who had cared for him since childhood. Belinda attributed his nervousness to the difficulty he had practicing in secret and credited her teaching, unaware that the lessons she provided were mostly odd survival tricks and unconventional methods. Despite her title as tutor, her role had been more akin to a nanny. Ghislain then asked if she was ready to go when she offered to call Sir Fergus, his personal escort knight. Ghislain declined, explaining that Fergus would slow them down and that the old man had nearly fainted recently while talking to him. Accepting this, Belinda agreed, and Ghislain, Belinda, and 4 knights swiftly departed from the estate.